Can I have your attention, please? So let's continue with the second part of our conference. We have already heard some very interesting presentation. Now we continue with the session number 3, which is called Fair and Open Research Data. I'm pleased to present Dr. Branimir Leskošek, the chair of this session and the head of Elixir Slovenia. And I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Ingrid Dilo, Dance and Fair Spheres project coordinator, as the main speaker. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I will first do the welcomes of Dr. Dilo in Slovenian language. Then I'll just do a short introduction to the topic. Torej, Dr. Dilo je namestnica Dansa, to je Data Archiving and Networking Services. Danes bo tudi največ o tem govorila, drugače je pa doktorila iz zgodovine in je najbolj dejavna na razvoju politik za različne ključne deležnike. Tako je sodelovala z Ministrstvom za izobraževanje, kulturo in znanost, za Nizozemsko nacionalno knjižnico, zanimajo pa tudi upravljanje z raziskovalnimi podatki in certificiranje digitalnih repozitorijev. Je tudi podpredsednica odbora za RDA, Research Data Alliance, članica različnih združenj, koordinira pa tudi Horizont projekt Fair is Fair. So I will switch back to English, just do a quick introduction to fair and open research data from the Elixir perspective. Elixir is a distributed research infrastructure for life science information and life science data. It's very likely, I think, the largest AS-free research infrastructure in Europe. It has 22 members from 21 countries, plus EMBL and 1 observer country, 23 nodes, and 1 hub, which is located in Kingston, UK. It's a virtual distributed infrastructure. It contains it is consisted from 5 platforms and many use cases, now called communities. And very important for fair and open data is here. You see, we want to actually provide access to free, open resources, regardless of location. There are already more than 140 resources within Elixir that are openly available with the open data. From the strategic objectives, we just published a new Elixir 5 years program, and from the strategic objectives, we also count on very strong collaboration with EOSC, and on open and federated service network of different data resources and data services. Of course, the data services should be fair. A few quotes from the Elixir program. First one, Elixir has actively contributed to the development of open data policies and FAIR concept. Especially important is fair data management in life sciences. So we will also provide different services for the life science data management and training in that area. Very important is also that Elixir is leading the joint biomedical sciences research infrastructure consortium in EOSC. It's called EOSC Life. So fair and open data in Slovenia. You already heard that we have, since 2015, national strategy of open access for the scientific publication and research data, which is now, being implemented. We have a Slovenian National Research Infrastructure Roadmap, where is also Elixir Slovenia as one of the landmarks. We just submitted the application for a national call for research infrastructure funding, and if that will be successful, we hope that it will be, we will be able to build archive of life science data, which will also be part of federated EGA. This is European Genotype and Phenotype Archive. Of course, we also plan collaboration with other ESFRIs, collaboration with EOSC and E-infrastructures, You probably know the HPC River project, already in implementation phase. We are collaborating with RDA Node Slovenia in 1 Million Genomes Declaration and other associations and declarations like Global Alliance for Global Health. To conclude, open biological data drives research, and for that we need sustainable databases that are interoperable, that are fair, that are safe and secure. From that, at this point I will conclude, and I invite Dr. Dilo to give her presentation. Yeah.
You have here.
Yeah. So good morning, everyone. I'm really delighted and honored to be here today and to have been invited to speak to you today. And we are going to shift gears a little bit, but I think that the first two presentations that we had form an excellent, let's say, context from which I can start. We heard a lot about open access. We zoomed in on open access in the area of publications, and now I want to go to yet another aspect of open science, of which we already heard from René, which is the sharing of data. And I want to talk about whether sharing research data is a fairy tale or not. We already heard that there is this discrepancy between the personal benefit of a researcher in maybe not sharing data and the good for all. So, but before I start my presentation, I want to do a little experiment with all of you in the room to keep you awake, because we are nearing lunchtime already. So if you could pull up a mobile phone for me, that would be really great. And I'm going to try to shift. Let's see. Because I want to do a little poll to see who you are. Oh, it's the other mouse click probably. Yeah. So if you could go to menti.com on your mobile, www.menti.com, and then type in 909220 as a code. Everyone who has a mobile phone, and I'm pretty sure that you all have one, and you can also do it on your laptop. It's on the screen. I'll make it. It's menti.com, and I'll go to the code is 9092. Oh, it's the other button. Sorry. This is a bit bigger. 909220. And my first question to you is, who are you? So, to which of the groups that I have on my screen do you belong, so that I get a sense of whom I'm talking to this morning? Ah, and you have found it. You have found it. Yes. The results are coming in. And we have a diverse audience. So people from all the categories that I could think of in this room. Very good. So we have students, a lot of researchers, a lot of librarians as well. Yeah. Very good. They should be very aware of the importance of research data. So that's nice to see. 35 people have answered the questions, and I see a lot more people in the room. So maybe with the next question, we get more people involved. So let's move. Still answers coming in. So the librarians are winning this competition. Interesting. Good.
It's not the right metrics.
No, don't go there. Don't go there. This is just for fun, you know. So now I need to see. Now we go to the next one. Again, the wrong one. So how familiar are you with the concept of fair? So that I get an idea. So there as well, a mixed concept, although there are not many people in the room who haven't heard from the acronym at all. And the majority has heard of the concept. Very good. Great. So, have you produced research data yourself? Is there anyone in the room who produces research data in their daily jobs? That's what you get when you have a lot of librarians in the room, right? Okay. A small minority has produced research data very often, but a lot of people have some experience with it, so that's good. Oop. So the next one then is, have you ever reused data produced by other researchers? And again, a majority has. So there is sharing of research data going on here. Have you ever written a data management plan in one of the projects that you have been involved in? We depend on the researchers in the room here for these questions, and not the librarians probably. Yeah. Good. So, and I think I now move to the final one. Which 3 words come to your mind when you think of the concept of fair data? So you can fill out 3 answers, and they will become visible on the screen, but you can do that anonymously, so you can write anything you want that comes up in your head. Don't be shy. Ah, there's the first one. So I see the 4 letters returning here. Free in the middle, access, of course, yeah. So this will be an interesting word cloud to have a look at after my talk maybe and see whether there is some correlation between the two. Great, so I see a lot of concepts that will come somewhere in my talk. So thank you very much for that. Everyone is awake, so I can start. And I go back to the presentation. There we go. So sharing research data, is it a fairy tale? This we already did. What I want to do is say 3 words about dance, then zoom in on the importance of data sharing in general, but I think a lot of it has been said already in a wider context here this morning. Then I want to zoom in on the FAIR principles. What are they? How do they, for example, relate to other terms like open data? And finally, I want to present to you an example of an implementation of FAIR let's say, in practice. So let's start with DANS. I'm pretty sure that not a lot of people in the room are familiar with that organization. I come from the Netherlands, and DANS is a data service provider. We exist since 2005, but we build on a number of much older data archives. So we have data that go back to the early 1960s in our archive. And we started off in the social sciences and humanities, so that is still a strong focus of ours, although we have expanded with our services to a lot of other disciplines as well. And this is reflected in our mission, which is very broad. It says that we need to promote and provide permanent access to digital research resources, so there is no mention of any specific domain there. We are an institute with a father and a mother. We belong to the Royal Academy of Arts and Sciences in the Netherlands, and we are also part of the Research Council in the Netherlands, NWO. So that is where I come from. And this is a slide that represents the fact that, and you all know that policymakers are more and more concerned and interested in the topic of open science. That is so on a global level. You can see here a report making open science a reality from OECD. You know that that is happening on a European level. We heard all about that this morning. The European Open Science Cloud is the focal point there. It happens in my country. You see a nice picture of my Minister of Education, Culture and Science there, who says that she fully supports the quest for open science. And you see a picture from your own country where you also, and we heard also about that, the National Strategy on Open Science. So policymakers are all in favor of open science. Part of that open science is the sharing of data. Open data is a big part of that. And why is that so important? Well, we heard this morning already about the importance of replication and validation of research outcomes that can only be done if data are shared. And this, of course, really adds to the integrity and the transparency of the scientific effort. So that is a very important motivator. Here you see a couple of headlines from papers and magazines talking about massive fraud cases that we were confronted with in my country a couple of years ago that really stirred not only the scientific world but the whole of the country, where it turned out that a professor in the social sciences had faked a lot of data and got a lot of exposure around his really interesting results that seemed to be based on nothing. So that gave a big push to open data and open science in my country. The question is whether that was for the right reasons, but that's another story. Because data sharing is also important with an eye on the reuse of data. We heard this morning already that the reuse of data makes research more efficient. It provides funders with a better return on their investment in research. But I think the biggest plus of it all is that you can stand on the shoulders of others, that it advances science. And of course, you can, when you share data, you can also do a lot of interesting interdisciplinary research. And I have two very simple examples. I myself am a maritime historian. I was a long time ago. So this example really appeals to me, which is an example that showed that making a study of the data that come out of 19th century logbooks from whaling ships helped climate scientists to understand climate change and see what happened. Because in those logbooks you had a lot of entries every day of ice conditions, weather conditions, etc., etc. Another nice example is this one where it turned out that comparing climate data with medical data showed a correlation between air temperature and heart attacks. So you can see that by combining and sharing data you can get some interesting results. So it seems a good thing for everyone, but what do researchers think? Here you see a question that was asked to a lot of researchers: how supportive would you be of a national mandate for open science? And you can see that the majority, a little bit more than half of them, strongly supported open data. So that's very good. But then we see hesitance in practice. And a recent international survey showed that at least 1/3 of the researchers is still not willing to share data. And of the 2/3 that do share data, again, 1/3 does stores the data on their own machine or in their own faculty. So if you do that, that doesn't make it very sustainable and also not very findable for others. So whether that is data sharing, I'm not sure. And why are researchers hesitant? Intellectual property rights, confidentiality issues, concerned about the misinterpretation or the misuse of their research, ethical concerns, concerns to be scooped. But very often I also hear from researchers that they say, well, it's my blood, sweat and tears. I spend so much effort on these data. They are mine. So we have a world to win there. Because how do we change that? And I think, how do we enable and how do we incentivize researchers to share data. I think we need a number of components. Cultural change is very important, and we heard about that this morning. Professional rewards for data sharing, data citation, seeing data as a really valuable output of research, of the scientific effort, just like publications, is very important. But also the way in which we train or raise our young researchers. If they are in a group, they have peers among them who do share, then we often see that young researchers are also willing to share. If the culture is different, it is very difficult to break that. So that is what we need. Of course, next to the carrots, we need the sticks. Funder policies can help, publisher requirements can help. And then we need infrastructure if researchers want to share data. They need infrastructure during research. Where do I store my data? How do I share the data during research? And we need trustworthy data repositories to store the data after the research is finished. Repositories that will be there for a long time, that can give guarantees, and that will offer a place also where reusers of the data can be sure that they can trust the data. And we need data experts to help the researchers in their research, writing data management plans, etc., etc. And finally, of course, we need research data management training for the researchers themselves. So all these ingredients are needed to enable and promote data sharing. So within the context of data management, the fair data principles are very important. They were invented, designed in 2014, and I had the privilege to be at that conference in Leiden, which was around the life sciences. By sheer coincidence, I was there because I replaced someone else, and that was the place where, for the first time, those four fair data principles were designed. The F, to make sure that data are easy to find, both by humans and machines, findable. The A for accessible. User license access conditions need to be in place around data, and open access, of course, if possible, but closed if you have sensitive data if needed. Interoperability, the data should be ready to be linked to other data in order to advance science. And the R for reusable, ready to be used, reused for future research. So quite generic data principles. They were published in an article in Nature, not long, long after that, 2 years it took. So that is quite long, but that's usually the case. And then there was set up a fair metrics group that zoomed into those 4 guidelines and tried to come up with metrics to make it more implementable. And nowadays we have seen that FAIR is going all over the place. We're not talking about FAIR data only anymore, but that was the starting point at that time, FAIR data and metadata, by the way. Now people are talking about the internet of FAIR data and services. All the services should be fair, training should be fair, tools should be fair, data should be fair. The whole world needs to be fair. What you also see is different implementations. For example, if you look at FAIR data, you can talk about the moment that the data is created. So a researcher should do that according to the FAIR principles. And you see all kinds of funders now also having that in their requirements for funding, for example, the European Commission. You can also assess existing data sets on their fairness. People are working on that to establish a profile for an existing data set. And there are also people now working on tools to transform existing data sets to a more fairer form. So you see all kinds of implementations popping up around this concept of fair. And also Europe, of course, has embraced the FAIR concept. We heard about that from René. We had the expert group that wrote a beautiful report, Turning FAIR into Reality. We have the Horizon 2020 program that has guidelines on fair data management. So FAIR has also entered Europe in that way. And we already heard about the project that just started the 1st of May. I'm not going to go into that, but that is a big project. 10 million euro will be spent by 22 partners to really find and provide practical solutions for the use of the FAIR data principles. The European Open Science Cloud needs to be fair. So what do we need for that? In terms of requirements for data, in terms of services and tools, and also in terms of training and awareness raising to make sure that there is that we foster a fair data culture and that good practices are taken up. So, to cut a long story short, everybody loves fair, and why shouldn't you? But then the question is, what does it really mean in practice, and how do you put those very generic practice guidelines and principles into practice? So I think there are a couple of things to say about the concept of fair. What I find quite difficult is that everyone now says we need fair data sets, and there are, mandates that say data need to be fair. But I think that is, first of all, everyone has a different concept of what fair in practice means. But also, it is not doable. You can't say these data are fair and these data are not fair. It is a kind of continuum. So we have this ideal image of a data set that we want to strive for. But in many cases, the ideal situation will never be reached because you deal with sensitive data, because in the humanities you deal with very fuzzy data, etc., etc. So I see it more as a continuum where you try to get as far to the ideal situation as you can. So it's not a black and white thing. Next to that, fair data and open data are not the same. Partly they overlap, but you can have a 100% fair data set that is not open because, for example, it's a medical data set and it contains personal information. But for the rest, it's completely fair. The other way around is also possible, that you have a completely open data set, but it's not fair at all. So I have the feeling that these two concepts get mixed up here and there, but they are really different things. And of course, open doesn't mean always 100% free either. So what then is fair? In how I usually see it is that it is really good research data management. If you manage your data well, the outcome will probably be that you have a fairly fair data set. It is a buzzword, and it helps us. It helped a lot in the sense that we discuss this now, and it also makes us, go to this dot on the horizon, and we see a convergence there. But on the other hand, I also think that it is something that we have been talking about already for a very long time before we had this term fair. So it's a bit of old wine in new bottles sometimes. Here you see those 15 fair metrics or guiding principles that came out of that working group. And they are quite practical, but still I see a lot of people struggling with them. On the one hand, with the interpretation of them, on the other hand, with the way in which they could turn this into a reality. Very often that's quite difficult. What I do know, and this is a slide that I stole from Karel Luyben, who is the chair of the EOS Executive Board. Here you see his vision of open science, and you can see that fair data are very prominent in this picture. And I think that is for a reason, because fair data really is really an important. So good research data management and sharing of data is a very important element in open science next to open publication. And fair data means fair data through the whole data life cycle, of course. So I want to finish with one concrete example of how a community has tried to translate those 4 letters into a practical guide for researchers. And this example comes from a European project called Parthenos, and I don't know whether anyone is familiar with the project. It is a project in the humanities with a lot of organizations from different member states participating. So I'll fly through that. So they tried to make this easy guide, and they have tried to structure a number of guidelines around the 4 letters, 20 guidelines, and they have 2 groups of users for their guidelines. On the one hand, it's the data producers, so the researchers, who need as clear and as simple guidelines as possible, I think, to start good research data management. And secondly, it's aimed at the research infrastructures and the data archives, so the supporters of the infrastructure. And it's interesting to see that they start their work by stating that it is very important that there is an investment both in people and in infrastructure, that is needed. And that corresponds nicely with what I said before about enabling researchers to do good data management, cultural change, training, and infrastructure. You see here a little example also, they refer to it in this statement to work that has been done within CESTA, and I know that also in Slovenia the CESTA community is quite active. So we have a training available which is focused really on research data management, which is focused at first instance on data experts, but is also very interesting for researchers to have a look at for further guidance for data management. So let's start with the F, the findable. Here you can see that they focus, when they talk about findable, on, of course, on easy access of the data, easy findability of the data, both for humans and computer systems. And they focus on the metadata in that respect, but also on the use of persistent identifiers. And they suggest that researchers make sure that they reference the persistent identifier that they use for the data in their research output, so that other people can find the data on which the assertions are based. There are some suggestions around the citation of research data, and also around the persistent identifiers for authors, also very important if you want to be findable for others. And of course about choosing the appropriate metadata schema. And here you see a little reference to a guide that is available online on persistent identifiers that helps researchers also get acquainted with the concept, and also explains which persistent identifier might be the best choice for you. So if you go to accessible, this is of course about well-defined access regulations, and making sure that the data, once you finish your research, end up in a place where they can be found, and also where they are accessible for others. And in that respect, it's very important that you find a trustworthy digital repository to put your data in. You need to state the accessibility, so you need to choose licenses, and of course, best thing is to choose a license that is as open as possible if the data allow that. And of course, there is always the possibility to put an embargo on your data if you still need to publish. But for example, at my archive, we try to incentivize researchers and not to go in that area too quickly. So if you say that the researchers should look for a trustworthy digital repository, you ask something from researchers, because here you see the homepage of a registry of research data repositories called Re3 Data. And you can see that there are almost 2,500 repositories and databases mentioned there. So where do you find the repository that is right for your data? That can be the proverbial needle in the haystack that you're looking for. Well, fortunately, over the last couple of years, there have become a number of certification standards available for repositories that they can acquire in order to prove to their audience that they are a trustworthy place, and that they take care of the long-term availability and accessibility also of the data. And the most successful one up till now is the Core Trust Seal, and here you see a snapshot of their homepage, and you can see that all in all we have almost 150 repositories around the world that have this stamp that provides you with the certainty that this is a good place to store your data for the long term. So the I and the R, the interoperability and the reuse, are the most difficult ones, the difficult aspects of FAIR. Interoperability means that your research data should be easily combined with other data sets to make interdisciplinary research, etc., possible, both for humans again and for computer systems. So what do you need to do for that as a researcher? You need to make sure that you use open and well-defined vocabularies. You need to document your metadata models, etc., etc. So there are a number of tips here that you can follow in order to make your data as interoperable as possible. But of course, not all the data will in the end be interoperable and combinable by computer systems. I'm very aware of that. File formats are also very important, and typically you want to make the right choices before you start your research, because if you have to change everything at the end, that is very time-consuming and very boring to do. So it's always good to think in advance about where you're going to store your data and have a look at their file formats. Very often repositories have preferred formats for which they guarantee a long-term preservation period. So that is also a very useful thing to do. Finally, the reusable bit, talking about the readiness of your data for future research. And there it's very important that you have ample documentation of your methodology, of your data, etc., to make them interpretable for other reusers. That has to do with naming conventions, again, file formats, also version control methods, etc., and the licensing for reuse. So this was just a little example to show you how complicated the implementation of FAIR can be in real practice. But there are coming more and more tools and services available online that can help you with that. Here again, you see everyone loves data, wants to share data. So the intent is there, but how to make it a reality is quite some steps away, I think, and we need a lot for that. If you are interested and you care about data, one of the things you can do is join the Research Data Alliance, which is an international organization that you can become a member of with no cost, just registering on the website. And we have 8,000 people already joining that initiative around the globe. And there is now a regional RDA Slovenia node, and that is really, really good. And this node is quite active, and I can tell you that they are now working on activities around citation, funders and open access, and that they will also organize 2 workshops for researchers from all disciplines on open access. And I stress all disciplines because I understand that this initiative started off in the social sciences and humanities, but wants to expand now to other disciplines within Slovenia. So please join that organization, and we have someone in the room here who represents the RDA node, so maybe you can stand up. Anyone who wants to know anything about it can come to you. Good. So, and with that, I would like, I know it's still 195 days away, but the actual birthday, but nevertheless, I want to congratulate you with that 100 years. And with that, I would like to finish. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Dilo. It's switched off. Yeah. So, is there any question? Any burning issue? Do you have any question? So everything is clear. You all have fair data.
Knows what to know.
Yeah.
Fair data in Slovenia.
Yeah, and data management. And maybe I have a question. Yeah. How do you foresee that the data management should be done, for example, on organizational level? You know, by every researcher, by himself or herself following the guidelines, or I'm implying a little bit on data stewards.
Yeah. Well, then maybe the best example I can give is from my own country. What we are trying to do in the Netherlands is build on a division of tasks and labor based on the different expertise that is available in different institutions. So we talk about a back office, front office model, where we say that the universities are the front offices and the research institutions. They are closest to the researchers. So the university, and very often you see the university library taking a responsibility there, should raise awareness amongst their own researchers and provide support and training in the area of research data management, should support researchers that want to write a data management plan. But in the back, we have in the Netherlands a couple of organizations that have a national remit. We are one of them. So we have specific expertise in the area of long-term preservation and curation and research data management. So the people, the data expert at the front offices are trained by us, and they can also use our expertise to serve their local audiences. So we try to organize it this way, because for us it's impossible to reach out to all the researchers in our country. So we use this phased model of a front office and a back office.
Thank you. So now, is there any more question, opinion? No?
Question. Yeah. A very brief question. You mentioned, but it was mentioned before as well, that one of the reservation for sharing your data is that you work hard for it and you want to use it and you want to publish as much as possible. And one possible way out of that is that the researchers get some kind of a reward or some kind of a recognition. Is there any good practice or a good practice example? What kind of rewards and what kind of recognition?
I think we're far from that at the moment. We talk about it, but it's not in place. For example, within my own institution, we try to do that in really simple ways, you know, by having, for example, a national data prize, where we put someone each year in the spotlight in the Netherlands who curated a beautiful data set that is of use for a lot of people. But what you really would want is that you get academic credit for also, just like you get for a publication, for curating a data set and documenting it in such a way that it can be reused by a wider audience than just the peers that are aware of your specific field of expertise. That would be the ideal situation.
Yeah, so can I ask? So Slovenia is actually Irina Vipavc-Brvar talking from Slovenian Social Science Data Archive. So in Slovenia we have this possibility. I think it's one of the one case from CESDA archives that actually data that are archived in Social Science Data Archive get academic credits in our academic systems. So that's one of the things, yeah.
Then you are very advanced there. We are only talking about it in NWO, not doing anything yet.
Is it enough? I mean, enough points for researchers.
Maybe we have, how to say, also a complementary idea. You know, we want to establish a faculty archive. I'm coming from Faculty of Medicine. And actually the reward for the researchers would be that they get storage and archive for free. Only obligation they have is to put in the metadata. Yeah. Okay, and we'll see how this will progress. Yeah. Okay, thank you. So any more opinion, or we still have 1 minute? Okay. Now we are well in time, so thank you again, Dr. Dilo. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So this takes us to our final session of today's conference. The final session is focused on European Open Science Cloud, already mentioned today. So I'm very happy to present, firstly, Mr. Peter Sterle, a representative of Slovenia in the EOS Governance Board, the chair of the last session, and the main speaker, who is Dr. Juan Bicarregui, member of the EOS Executive Board. Please, the floor is yours.
Dobrodošli, welcome. So this session will be about EOSC. EOSC has started as a very simple idea. Let's make all data fair and open. like let's make a flying car, very simple idea. And it has become quite complicated exercise. Now I'm instructed to switch in Slovene for a few minutes. Predstavil vam bom naslednjega panelista. Dr. Juan Bicarregui je vodja sektorja za podatke na oddelku za znanstveno računalništvo pri Science and Technology Facilities Council. To je neodvisna ustanova, ki deluje pod pristojnostjo britanskega ministrstva za gospodarstvo, energijo, industrijsko strategijo in je bila ustanovljena leta 2007. Je ena večjih multidisciplinarnih raziskovalnih organizacij in ima zaposlenih okoli 2000 ljudi. Ima približno 800 milijonov letnega proračuna in ima trenutno aktivnih tudi 800 razpisov v skupni vrednosti malo pod pol milijarde evrov. Dr. Juan Bicarregui se ukvarja z raziskavami in razvojem podatkovnih sistemov za obdelavo znanstvenih podatkov. Sooblikoval je politiko Združenega kraljestva glede odprtega dostopa do rezultatov raziskav in bil je tudi član usmerjevalne skupine, ki je ustanovila Združenje za raziskovalne podatke in tako tudi sodeluje z RDA, Research Data Alliance. Trenutno je koordinator projekta EOSC Pilot, ki podpira prvo fazo razvoja evropskega oblaka odprte znanosti. Mr. Juan, I introduced you as coordinator of EOSC Pilot. EOSC Pilot has been funded by European Commission to help European Commission to start with initial phase of EOSC process and also to create longer-term vision for the EOSC. So majority of the task for each pilot would go around how to develop service architecture which is based on interoperability, how to enable common use of infrastructures with emphasis of collaborations across disciplines, community building and determine of the future governance, policy and purpose of EOSC. And also a lot of other activities, but let's just put this into the perspective. In Slovenia, we have around 20 archives or repositories for e-data, and we have maybe a couple of dozens scientific communities which are spread over different disciplines. But yet in Slovenia is very, very hard to organize all these architectures, event, communities in the way that publicly financed scientific processes, actually the results are published openly and on the fair principles. And you can imagine in Europe you have plethora of different researchers, research communities, architectures, archives, repositories. So the level of EOSC is on the creation of EOSC is on completely different level. And I would now ask Dr. Juan Bicarregui to explain us more about EOSC and related processes and activities, please.
So hello everybody, and thank you for that introduction and thank you for the invitation to talk here. It's a great pleasure to talk about EOSC. I've been doing it for a while and I continue to do it for many years in future, I hope, because I think this really is a very major initiative. I think a lot of the talks we've had this morning, and I apologize for missing the very beginning of the conference as I had to come in this morning, have been talking about how we got here, and I thought since I was speaking last, I would try and give a picture of where we're going from here. So what's next? So I called the talk, What's Next? I'm going to cover three things. What is it we're trying to achieve? What do we need to do to achieve that? And what will it look like when we get there? And I'll give some slides that are kind of formal texts from various documents, but quite a lot of slides that are just pictures. And to me, the pictures mean something, and I hope they'll mean something to you by the end of the talk. But sometimes people come up to me afterward the talk and say, oh, you've shown a lot of pictures, they mean something to you, but they mean nothing to me. So I'll let you judge during the talk whether these pictures convey a meaning or not. Okay, so what are we trying to achieve? Here is the formal piece of text that's been quoted a lot. It's from the implementation roadmap. And I just pulled out a few phrases that, that kind of set the scope of what we're talking about. The first is that it's about research data management, and the objective is that European scientists should be able to get the full benefits from the data-driven science. I think it's unquestionable that the research today is very, very much focused on data, and the more we can use that data and get more benefit from that data, the better. It's going to be a virtual environment. It says free at the point of use with open and seamless services. That's a grand ambition, right? Open and seamless services, everything interacting perfectly. But we at least set the target there, and then we have to work out how we get from where we are today. We were just hearing that even within the repositories in Slovenia, it's already a task to try and get them to work together. To imagine doing that across the whole of Europe, it's a very ambitious objective, but it's clear, it's good to know what we're aiming at. And then some examples of the things that we're talking about. We're talking about storage, management, analysis, reuse of data, and we're talking about doing this across borders and across disciplines. And those two dimensions are very important. A lot of the motivation comes from the researchers, and the researchers really think in disciplines, and so in a lot of disciplines we already have infrastructures that work across borders. And also, in some of the horizontal services, as they're called, in terms of the network and access to HPC and things, we already have some infrastructures that work across borders, that work across disciplines, but less so across borders. Some of those are national things across disciplinary. So, you know, we have to try and take the best of each side and bring it all together. So here's a diagram that's supposed to sort of convey why are we doing this. Well, we're trying to increase innovation. We're trying to increase the discovery of new knowledge and the innovation that comes from that knowledge. And if you look at this diagram, you can see it as two different cycles. On the right-hand side, we've got the research process, where it's about knowledge creation, it's about improving our understanding of the world, and it's about depositing the results of that in that research, that new knowledge into the body of knowledge. On the left-hand side of the diagram, it's about the innovation process. This is maybe more what the governments try to do through various initiatives. It's about wealth creation and improving the quality of the life of the citizens. And that is building on the back of the knowledge that is coming from the research life cycle. And I'll come back to that diagram in a minute to see how that might change if we implement the infrastructure that we're talking about here. So now looking at the right-hand side of that, the research life cycle, there's many stages and it's in a cycle, and there are many versions of this diagram that lots of people have used. And here I forced every step to begin with C, just to be clever, as it were. So we start by forming collaborations. The collaborations create something, create papers, create knowledge, create data, whatever it is. If it's data, we want to store that somewhere. We do some computation on that, so some analysis. We curate the outcome of that. We collect together outcomes from different resources, different experiments, different research, and communicate that through papers or any other means. And then that communication leads to new collaborations and new research. The way we're trying to change this, the top half of that is what's commonly called open access. It's about the collaboration, the communication of papers. The lower half of this, if we open that up, that's around open data. And the thing as a whole is called open science. Now, what are we trying to change? Well, we're trying to communicate at every stage in this life cycle. Instead of waiting for a paper to be published to communicate the results of the research, we want to communicate those as soon as possible, so even during the research. Now, we've already had questions about incentives and motivations and scooping and all that. So these are all barriers that we have to be aware of. But the earlier we can communicate the results, then the earlier that communication can lead to new collaborations. So we also want new collaborations to be formed at every stage in the life cycle. And this would really change the way things are done, and it accelerates everything. But as I said, bearing in mind that the current cycle has barriers to this. If we think about those two new aspects, it makes much better to put the collaboration and communication in the center of something, so it's no longer a life cycle. It's a series of activities, each of which is depositing something in this common repository, this common infrastructure that can be shared, that can be communicated, that can start new collaborations and be reused in different ways. If you apply that same thinking to this diagram, you get a similar kind of diagram where all of these different stages are all happening at once and are all putting the results of each process into the body of knowledge when it happens, rather than waiting for a paper to be written. As if Ingrid said, the FAIR paper itself took 2 years to be published from when the ideas were coming. We don't want to wait 2 years for all these ideas to be put out there into the public. The infrastructure that will enable that could be called the European Open Science Cloud, can also be called an open data science environment. This is a phrase I actually prefer myself. This was in the 2015 ministerial communication from the G7 ministers. So they call this an open data science environment, and that's the phrase that I think really explains what we're trying to do. So that's what are we trying to achieve? What do we need to make it happen? Well, here's a diagram that I picked up from a report that was written by the EIRG, the E-Infrastructure Reflection Group, back in 2013. And it's really describing the infrastructure situation as it was then, and to a large extent still is now. We have some vertical or domain-specific research infrastructures. We heard before about Elixir, and EMBL is one example of a domain-specific research infrastructure, absolutely essential to the researchers in that domain, absolutely targeted on supporting the research in that domain, and that's excellent, that's what needs to happen, but with not so much sharing across domains of the underlying infrastructure. On the other hand, we have horizontal infrastructures. The research network is one of them. It's very reassuring to be able to come here and go into Edurome and not have any problem with that. That's one of the major achievements over the last 10 years or so, that now works across the world. It's a fantastic achievement. It's taken a while, but at least we've got there now, I think. The sharing of high-performance computing, for example, through PRACE and things like this, are other examples of horizontal infrastructures that are used in a cross-disciplinary way, some of them across borders as well. And then the overlap of those two, here talking about greater sharing of resources and data, is the area where we want to focus. We want to see where can those horizontal activities, horizontal research infrastructures, and the vertical ones interact better. So in here we've made a sort of cloud-shaped thing in purple, a mixture of red and blue, that is supposed to be where the European Open Science Cloud is focused. And as well as sort of being a merge of the horizontal and the vertical infrastructures, it's also an opportunity to build upwards. So above the 3 layers of blue that I had before, we've now put an inter-domain catalogue of services. So the idea there is if something developed by one domain is of use to another, they should just be able to access it without too much work on the part of the user. Eventually, with no work, but let's start off with not too much work. So there's greater sharing across domains as well. It's an infrastructure to enable greater sharing across domains. Now, so I call this merging the horizontal and vertical infrastructures. Of course, that means some building, and to build things we need real resources, we need projects. There's a program, Infra EOSC, in the Horizon 2020 program, which has maybe 20 or 30 action lines, and I've put a few of them on this diagram to show what projects are involved already today in building this infrastructure and building across the infrastructure. So here we have some horizontal projects. RDA was already mentioned by Ingrid, and so was FAIR's FAIR. There are others at the higher level that are about portal and access to portal into various services. There's a catalogue of services. There's Open Air, which is about supporting sharing of data and papers. So these are horizontal projects, and there are also vertical ones. Here I've put the 5 so-called S3 cluster projects in the different domains in environmental science, life science, physics, photon and neutron science, and social science and humanities. So this is already a clustering together of domain-specific infrastructures, and it's starting by clustering together the ones that are in related domains. And I think it's kind of obvious that that's where you would start. is much less of a driver to share particle physics data with social science than there is to share across different life sciences. So this is just to try and picture there the fact that there are real projects doing real things, and now, more increasingly, every one of those is taking an open science perspective in its work program, because that's being driven by the funder, quite rightly. So those are the projects. Those are how we're actually going to build this infrastructure. There's also got to be a governance structure. I'm not sure if René gave a slide like this before I came in. This is the sort of 5 different areas of governance that are currently being developed. Peter is a member of the governance board, so the governance board has a representative per member state and associated country, and that's overseeing, the funder's contribution to it, the national contribution and the national strategic perspective. The executive board, which is charged with actually doing the coordination to make the projects deliver something in common. There will be the stakeholders forum. There were already 2 events once per year under the EOS pilot project, which are really about bringing the community together. And those will continue, and I think over time they will take more of a steering and directing role rather than just sort of a being told role, bringing the community in to give advice into the structure. And then 2 other bodies, at the bottom of the diagram, the projects that I already mentioned. This has to be built, and building takes really quite considerable resource, and so the projects are there. And those resources were already there, if you like. They were already building their specific infrastructures. The idea is to coordinate across the projects that are there to try and build an infrastructure that is more shared. And then there's going to be set up now some working groups reporting to the executive board that will sort of steer specific areas of work. And there are 5 of those initially, and there will be more in the near future, where we will get experts together to deliver on certain topics. And I'll mention the 5 working groups that already exist in a moment. This is just the membership of the executive board. I don't need to go into that, but it's 11 people across various infrastructures and some individual experts as well. So I will just talk briefly about the 5 working groups that are starting up about now, just in the final stages of getting the membership set. And these are really coordinating different areas of work that need to happen. So there's one working group on landscape. The EOS is something new, but it's built by putting things together that already exist. Nobody is saying we're going to throw away the existing infrastructures and build something new. What we're going to do is try and work in terms of standardization, into technological standards, service standards, etc., to try and integrate the working infrastructures that are already there. Because the last thing we want to do is step backwards. It's about stepping forwards from where we are. So there's one group that is looking at the landscape that's already there so that we know what our baseline is. There's one group looking at fair data practice, and you've just heard from Ingrid about fair, so I won't go into that anymore. I think this is really looking across the different domains and trying to identify where the commonalities are, where the differences are, bringing that all together. There's a group on architecture, which is absolutely crucial from a technical point of view, which is about developing the standards, the technologies that can be shared in order to enable the different domains, the different horizontals and the different verticals to work together. A lot of this will be about standardization, and RDA will be one of the vehicles that drives that standardization, that agrees that. Very importantly, this has to work at a global level as well. The domains, the research, happens at a global level. We cannot have a solution that works only in Europe but doesn't allow European life scientists to work with American life scientists. That would absolutely be impossible. So it has to be done at a global level, and RDA is a global organization, so it's one way that those standards can be discussed at a global level. Rules of participation, which I'm chairing. The name sounds a little bit bureaucratic. I don't think it's about the reason we have rules of you have to think about why do we have rules of participation. If I'm going to provide some data on EOSC, why should there be any constraints on that? Well, you have to look at it from the user's point of view. When the user comes to use something that's available through EOSC, they have to know the quality of that. They have to have some assurance of quality. It's actually one of the sub-bullets under the R of the FAIR is about the provenance of the data, for example. And if you're going to have provenance of data, if you're going to have quality assurance of the services that are provided, then you have to have rules when you start putting things in there. So, albeit at the beginning, there'll probably be a very low barrier to entry, we have to have some way so that eventually whatever is provided through EOSC has its own provenance, is accessible about its quality. And in order to do that, you have to have rules about what you put in. And then finally, sustainability. Currently, EOSC is being built through 20 or so big projects. We have to think about how do we continue that into the long term, beyond the current funding cycle, into Horizon Europe. What's the vehicle for sustaining the cooperation and for doing the oversight to enable that cooperation to happen? So those are the 5 groups that will start their work now. Most of them run for about 18 months. The current governance framework that I showed you on the slide previously is in place until the end of 2020, by which time there'll be something new come under Horizon Europe. So that's kind of the baseline. That's where we are now. I think there is a lot of topics that have still to be discussed. Some of them have been discussed here today already. So I'll just give you 3 ideas, sort of what and who and how. This first thing, looking at that phrase, open data science environment, you can parse this, you can understand this in different ways. You can say it's a science environment for open data, and that's definitely something that it has to be. You can also say it's an open environment that has the data of science in it. So the word open can either be applied to the data or the environment. So one is about data standards, data formats, data metadata, and all those things. The other is about technologies that enable interoperation at the technical level of the various services and software components. So it needs to be an open data and it needs to be an open environment. Again, partly so that we can plug together existing things and so that we can also interoperate with things that are going on outside Europe. So under that thought, we can think, well, what does fair data mean in practice? What does open data really mean? Of course, we've just heard Ingrid talking about that. What does it mean to share resources? Are we talking about federation or are we talking about merging? Are we talking about bringing data together and putting it all in one place and maybe making a transformation as it comes together so it's all there in one form? Or are we talking about accepting that this is a distributed data source that we need to somehow federate to enable cross-searching and things like that? And there's no right answer to that question. Different answers will be right for different situations. So we have to accept that there'll be both of those models and all the in-between models as well. What does it look like to the users? Is every one of those 1.7 million researchers going to the same portal and doing their science through that portal? I don't believe that. And I'll come back to my diagrams in a minute to emphasize that. So what does it mean? Are the users going to the same portal they always were? And how is it richer than it would have been otherwise? So portal or portals, I'll come back to that later. How will we do that? As I said, we've got to think about things. The rules of participation are crucial, otherwise we won't know what we've got when we use EOSC, and you can't do science if you don't know the provenance of the things you're using. So that's crucial. We have to worry about data stewardship models. We have to worry about the business model. In that initial sentence that I gave you right at the start, it says free at the point of use. Does that mean everything that's available through EOSC is free at the point of use? Or does it mean some of the things are free at the point of use? Obviously, the things aren't free to provide, so somebody is getting paid somehow. So where are the money flows that are enabling things to be available free at the point of use? And then, of course, we have to worry about ethical questions. Protection of personal data would be one, but also sometimes the scientific data itself has to be protected. An example I like is about the location of rare bird species. For example, it's a scientifically interesting thing, doesn't have a protection of personal data angle, but if you make it known, soon those birds would be even more rare than they are now. So there are other areas where ethical considerations have to come in as well as protection of personal data. So who is this about? Well, who should be engaged? How are we going to organize the communication? 1.7 million researchers, there's a lot of people to communicate with. It's clear that we're not going to sort of not have them in the EOSC today and tomorrow they'll all be using the EOSC. It has to be a progressive thing, so how do we target the communication? How do we bring the users in the most sensible way so that we build momentum in the right way? Who is this user base exactly? What are the user skill sets? Can we ask them to do something differently than they're currently doing? I'll come back to that one as well. Who are the providers? How will we integrate the other national initiatives. So all the majority of the research infrastructure and the research funding is coming through national initiatives. So we have to find a way of bringing all those different national things together to build a European thing. And how will we integrate with things outside of Europe? I already said from the sort of standards point of view, RDA is one way of having a global conversation, but in other areas we also have to have a global conversation. How can we make sure that happens properly? These are all open questions that I think really have to be considered now. So in summary, I've given you this, what are we trying to achieve? So I'm not at the summary yet. What are we trying to achieve? The next thing is what will it look like when we have it? So I talked about the clustering of projects. These 5 S3 clusters are already clusters of separate infrastructures. So in this diagram, I'm trying to sort of give a bit more shape to what we got before when we're clustering different infrastructures first, the related ones, the ones where we see immediate cross-disciplinary benefit. And then we have a cluster of clusters, and eventually we bring those together. That's on the sort of vertical side. And notice that I've expanded the bottom end because it's easier to share things lower down in the technology stack than it is higher up. So down at the bottom here we have data storage, we have networking, we have compute. As you go up the stack, it becomes more difficult, more domain specific. On the horizontal side, well, we've got some cross-disciplinary infrastructure already. What are the next steps? Well, we can try sharing methods and software and workflows. We build this sea of provenance-fair data. Some of the sort of commercial cloud-type commercial organizations talk about data lakes. Don't like the idea of a lake because in a lake things flow in and out again. A sea, I think, is more what it is because it's connecting different countries and things like that. Anyway, the sea of provenance-fair data, and then we have an interdomain catalog of services, which is there available but is not at the top. And you'll see in this next diagram, the top of each of these clusters is sticking up through there. So my own personal view is the individual researcher is still using the portal that they always used. And maybe, if they're not doing anything new, they don't even see a transition. But what they get offered is a greater breadth of services. So as well, when they're using the data set they've always used, somehow other data sets are available and can be offered to them, and some sort of system which recognizes what's likely to be of use to them. But if they don't want to touch that, they can carry on as was, because I think the existing infrastructures do their job and we don't want to break them. So at the top here, we have the individual portals that are tuned to the specific domain as well. If I'm a researcher in one domain, I don't want to be bothered with stuff from somewhere else, probably. I only want to see the stuff I'm interested in. So it's very difficult to imagine a global portal that will not clutter things with irrelevant stuff. So I think at the top, it doesn't look that different. It's just the functions that are available are broader because at the lower levels of the stack, things are shared more. So how do we achieve that kind of invisibility? And what's the benefit? If it looks the same to the researcher, why is it any different? So let's focus at the data that's at the heart of this, at the heart of my diagram with the 2 cycles that I had earlier. It's not just one great big data repository, obviously. It's a distributed data repository that is somehow brought together and shareable. What do researchers do? Well, they create some data. They want it stored for a while, and then they're going to access it later. They're going to do analysis. It's clearly oversimplified for the sake of making the diagram look nice. But so this is what the researchers do. They create the archive. And what do you need to enable that? You need an infrastructure underneath, an e-infrastructure, a data infrastructure, which includes storage and compute and networking and a whole bunch of services and curation services, analysis services, etc. If you think about this diagram, you can look at 2 different dimensions. The red dimension before, which I talked about the verticals, the domain-specific stuff, is now horizontal in this diagram, and it's the virtual research environment that the researcher works in. They're creating their data, they're putting it somewhere, they're getting it later, it's supporting the analysis they're doing. But really, the vertical part here, which is the sort of information infrastructure that allows that all to happen, if the researcher didn't know that was there, didn't have to worry about that, that would be good. They should not have to worry about how the data is kept from one year to the next. They should not have to worry that the network works, that the compute services work. In some of these domains, they already don't have to worry about that. I don't have to worry about how eduroam works. I've got no idea how eduroam works, and I'm very glad that I don't have to know how eduroam works. And so we should have the same approach in developing the e-infrastructures that support our research service. So here we have, the blue part is invisible, the red part is the same as it was. The researcher is working at the top of those domains in an environment that isn't that different from what they're used to. The only difference they might notice is that they get offered more things than they were previously being offered. The top part of this is about the curated FAIR data that we already talked about. The lowest part about this is the shared e-infrastructure. But the new thing is that the data across the middle, the data that the researchers used, is provenanced, is accessible, and is coming from a broader range of sources than they're currently used to. It's not just my data, it's everybody's data, and I have access to it as and when required. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much for presentations. At the beginning, in 2016-17, when I first heard about EOSC, I was completely confused. What is that? They were talking about organization through which they will finance existing infrastructure, all sort of stuff. But I think that lately things are getting clearer. So do you have any questions for? So we will get EOSC. Can you predict when first services will be available through EOSC infrastructure?
So this is incremental. We already have an EOSC. It was launched last November. Yeah. And so there is a portal, the EOSC portal. You can go there, you can access services. There aren't so many services there at the moment, but it's a starting point. And as I said, this is like a snowball. You have to start from somewhere and build. If we wait till everything's ready and then build it all of a sudden, we'll never start. So we have to start and building things. So there are a bunch of services available there, from data curation services to compute services and others already on the EOSC portal. And then that will be added to over the coming years.
Yeah, and so we will get EOSC on European level. Mm-hmm. So we member states now we just can relax and not building our infrastructure because EOSC will do it for us. Is that the case?
No, as I said, I think the vast majority of the research infrastructure is provided at national level and at university level. That's without doubt, and that will continue. Yeah. So what we're trying to do is get better value from those existing infrastructures by sharing at a European level.
Yeah, because we got a little exercise about building federated infrastructure with eduroam. You referred to the eduroam a couple of times. We started with eduroam here in Slovenia 15 years ago. We established first access point at the Faculty for Social Sciences in the library. It's what is worrying me is that some universities still didn't manage to put all the support that users would need to connect to the single sign-on authentication. So when universities hear about the common infrastructure in Europe, this should be a wake-up call that they would build support for their users for some common e-services. With this,
I completely agree, and I think it's taken a long time to get eduroam, 15 years. That's not really surprising. If you look at a lot of technologies, from the idea to the full maturity and universal availability, 20 years is not uncommon. So it does actually take a very long time, and we're trying to push things as fast as we can. But I think we have to be aware that this is a long-term project.
So will be probably crucial for Slovenia that the ministry will actually pay attention to support activities on open science, especially supporting to create appropriate infrastructure, like for repositories, long-term data storages, and also infrastructure for access. We hope that that we will achieve this in the next couple of years, and I would thank you for to our presenter on EOSC, and thank you for actually participating. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I see now the opportunity to get information that something will happen in Slovenia. With your support and support of ministry, we have gathered the project, the European regional project, EOSC, and Slovenia has 2 partners in it. The Greece is the coordinator, and we will one of the many, but the first task is to organize to the national initiative, the community for EOSC. Something will happen in near future, also in Slovenia.
Yeah, good. I think it's essential that every country plays its part, and I mean every country. This can't just be something done by a few of the larger countries in Europe. It has to be done across the board. So, you know, whatever is the national infrastructure has to be sort of thought slightly differently. It's not about changing everything. It's just about trying to think, how can we do this in a way that's going to make it interoperate better with the rest.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Finally, to conclude the conference, I would like to ask Dr. Mojca Kotar, Assistant Secretary General from the University of Ljubljana, and also a great expert on all of these topics, to say a few final words. Please.
Dear Dean, Vice Dean, too generous, definitely. So, the future of science is open. Science will be open by default. But there is full transformation of science going on, and low or very low awareness of busy researchers. In the current transition period, provisions on openness are seen as an additional burden by many researchers. So, I guess aligned international national policies are needed, interoperability, training, and support. It seems that a research assessment is an important aspect in the transition to open science by default. 1 week ago, there was this joint statement issued by the European University Association and Science Europe on combining activities, and here I will cite: to develop and implement accurate, transparent, and responsible approaches to scholarly research assessment. The end of citation. And one big topic, at least probably for Slovenia, the transformation of subscription scholarly communication to full and immediate open access. Max Planck Digital Library has shown in 2015 that there is enough money in the subscription system so that all scientific communication around the world can be immediately and fully open access. So there are exciting developments ahead. Everybody is invited to follow and join. Thank you.
Thank you, Mojca. At the end, if you will just allow me to express gratefulness to all of our speakers for bringing their expertise and experience to the table. Thank you all for really stimulating contributions. I'm sure that these topics will be subject to many future discussions. I would also like to thank you all for attending here and online. Hopefully you enjoyed the conference. And at the end, I would like to express very special thanks to Dr. Mateusz Rudolf, head of our publishing division, and especially to Dr. Mojca Kotar, who both took care of absolutely everything from the very beginning, and they made an amazing effort on organizing this conference. Thank you very much.